I think now is probably a really good time to have a quick look at the correlation between the spreading of misinformation and the loss of civilian life. I'm convinced that spreading of misinformation, like the most recent one, where thousands of babies are imminently about to die in the next 48 hours because of famine, has resulted in the killing of 2 embassy staff in the States. And I think that liking and sharing misinformation doesn't make someone a bad person. I think we've all probably done it. So there are a few examples of this having happened, right? There were let's go both sides, right? The Israelis claimed that 40 babies had been beheaded, which to me, look, at the time, I didn't take to Instagram to say they're beheading babies or anything, but given that it was already obvious that all of these kids had been raped and murdered and dragged into tunnels, the idea that they'd also been beheading babies. Oh, and of course, I've watched the footage of a man being beheaded with a gardening tool on October 7th. And so the idea that 40 babies had been beheaded, it didn't really stretch the evil of what had gone on that significantly. But for argument's sake, let's refer to that as a kind of misinformation that helped to galvanize a global Jewish sentiment around the justified response that would eventually be the bombing of Gaza. That's an example of how misinformation may contribute to the severity of a response, the loss of civilian life. We can't go back in time and see whether or not that particular cherry on the icing really had an effect, but for argument's sake, let's suppose that it might have. We might also take another example of something that's been determined to be misinformation, which was the Israeli claim that there were Hamas operation centers underneath hospitals or underneath a particular hospital. It turned out that there was not enough evidence to claim that the tunnel or tunnels underneath this particular hospital, where weapons were found, of course, was necessarily a point of operations. So on a technicality, the fact that it was not able to be proven that this was not some type of like HQ. And I think what people expected was that it would look like a scene from Mission Impossible or Team America, right? Where there's a bunch of like computers and people with headsets and it's like this kind of operations going on. But for argument's sake, again, let's just say that those tunnels with those weapons caches hiding Hamas ops did not technically amount to a base of operations. We could also take the instance from the other way around of on October 19th, the claim that Israel had deliberately bombed Al Ali Hospital, killing hundreds of people. It was very immediately revealed that this wasn't even Israel, that Islamic Jihad had managed to fire a rocket into a hospital of their own. Honestly, you could play cause and effect for a long period of time. I can understand the argument that even though it was a misfire, there wouldn't have been a misfire at all if Israel had not begun its attack on Gaza. You could then argue cause and effect all the way back for decades. Why were Israel doing that? Why did Hamas do what they did on October 7th? So on and so on. So there's no point. For the purposes of this quick video, it's safe to say that the misinformation around the deliberate targeting of hundreds of civilians in a hospital within, 12 days of October 7th, immediately galvanized a Western sentiment already anti-Israel around Israel's lack of moral capacity to militarily engage with Hamas, which I would argue is the height of irony. But at this point in time, people like myself were still actively engaged in conversations with people that I had thought were really reasonable, intelligent, wonderful people about the fact that Israel had either overseen October 7th to give themselves this false flag event, enabling them to begin a genocide, but that they had also only themselves to blame for encouraging this event which they should have been better prepared for. And on top of that, had contrived the civilian deaths and the rapes, that these things probably hadn't actually happened. But also, if they had happened, that they were part of a completely reasonable and moral resistance fight. So kind of four mutually exclusive arguments. And so you kind of realize very, very quickly on in this horror that no matter how you speak to some people about this thing, they will find a way to make it impossible for the only Jewish state to have anything to say, let alone do, about the circumstances they're in. The thing is that when I speak like this, it's interpreted too often as a justification for a war that I've been vocally against since its inception. I'm on the record saying that a military response to Hamas is not going to fix the problem, and it might create more problems than it tries to fix. I'm also on the record saying that it is an imminent civilian disaster, no matter how it goes. But apparently, seeking clarification on the extent to which people spread misinformation is conflated with the justification of war. And it's quite the opposite. This kind of brings me to why I seek clarification on these things. I seek clarification on misinformation and people's motives around spreading misinformation because diaspora Jews have to experience the ramifications of that misinformation, right? Misinformation has resulted in the purging of the Australian arts of Jews. The only Jews that remain are Jews that are subject to a character test based exclusively on their conception of Middle Eastern politics, geopolitical events, and the extent to which a Jewish state has the right to exist. A Zionist, like myself, is not somebody who blindly believes that the Israeli war machine is somehow the most moral army in the world, right? I'm somebody who has been very vocally anti-Netanyahu for many years. The only other people I ever rubbed shoulders with at anti-Netanyahu movements in Australia were Zionists. I didn't see any of these other people there. There are a lot of Zionists out there who desperately care about humanity and who also desperately care about the ways in which misinformation and radicalization affect diaspora Jews. And you are allowed to care about those two things without pitting one against the other. In fact, I think it's really important. When I read that 2 embassy staff had been killed in America yesterday, I couldn't help but see a correlation between the latest run of misinformation that's gone out there. And once again, the reason I said nothing about this misinformation is because it seems to be impossible to say, hey, this is misinformation, without people then accusing you of somehow being okay with the bombing of Gaza and with the displacement of Palestinians. These things are not mutually exclusive. You can have both. You can care about diaspora Jews and how misinformation hurts them, and you can also care about the tragedies that are going on the other side of the world. Unless you're an idiot or you're an anti-Semite or, and this is the one that I hinge everything on, or you're just someone who really cares but isn't equipped with the ability to know how to care properly. The latest misinformation was that tens or hundreds of thousands, I don't keep track anymore on the levels of misinformation. Some huge amount of babies in Gaza were going to die imminently within a 48-hour period because of the blockade of aid and food and whatever. You can have both. You can be very disturbed by the blocking of aid, the blocking of food to Palestinian people. And you can also understand that spreading lies around the imminent effects on 50,000 babies or whatever it was is closer to centuries-old blood libel and classic capital A antisemitism than actually caring about what's going on. And it is when we see the peddling of these myths and these lies and these distortions to extort the sympathies of well-meaning Western people is that we start to see huge ramifications for diaspora populations. I accidentally walked from a Jewish wedding to a public bathroom and back last week, and the bathroom was like within 200 meters of where this wedding was, but I was wearing a yarmulke and I forgot that I was wearing it. And when I realized I was wearing it, and this is not the first time this has happened where I've accidentally walked out of an event or a shul, in a YAML car. But over the last 18, 19 months, realizing I'm accidentally wearing a YAML car has conjured a fear within me that I never thought I would have. Like, I don't scare easily. And the fear isn't that I'm scared of some person hurting me. It's not like that. It's a hyper awareness of the hyper awareness of others. And maybe it's a projection. But the fact is that I have never been interrogated more on my political opinions through the lens of me being Jewish in my life. Actually, that's never been a thing that's happened. And all of a sudden, the way in which I answer questions like, am I a Zionist, is used as an entry certificate to a litany of spaces and dynamics that I had for a really long period of time felt welcome in. I do believe that most people don't know what a Zionist is. I do believe that most people don't understand that an appreciation of the Jewish people just being from a particular space and having the right to some level of self-determination in that region. I believe that most people probably actually think that that's reasonable. I don't realize that that is the bones of Zionism, right? Zionism has nothing to do with excusing violence, the expansion of territory, the expulsion of people. That said, I'll be lying if I didn't say that Zionism hadn't resulted in the displacement of hundreds of thousands, I think 750,000 Palestinian people in 1947, 48, 49. I'd also be lying if I didn't say that the War of Independence in 1948 also resulted in the displacement of 850,000 Jews from the region, who very quickly had only one place to go, one safe place to go, Israel. I think people used to say that history is written by the winner. I'm not so sure anymore. It feels like history or even current events can be written and rewritten by the most angry, the most petulant, the most violent, and the most virulent. I'm terrified that a lack of critical thinking is perpetuating dynamics around the world that make it increasingly difficult to be Jewish, to say, as we have for millennia, next year in Jerusalem at the end of Seder. If you were sharing blood libel, misinformation, stuff about, how I think the Lancet a year ago said something, or they posted a letter, I remember. They posted this letter, and the letter said, or made it sound like 200,000 Palestinian people had been killed. I watched well-meaning people, a friend of a friend who's like a paramedic, right? He's like not an idiot, and by all accounts, he's a reasonable person. I'd met him a few times, had nice times with him, and him, along with many, many others. I saw posts about how Israel has killed 200,000 people. And all you had to do was read the letter slowly to see that it didn't say that. But these things carry, or like the doctored AI-generated thing about Rafah, right? Rafah Day. Remember Rafah Day? It was like Coney 2012 again. And of course, where did they end up? They were so close to finding these 6 Israeli hostages. And thanks to Rafah Day, thanks to international pressure, while Hamas continued to bomb crossings and blame the Israelis, the Western world fell for it, and 6 hostages were shot dead point blank. No one found out about that, did they? And yet at the same time, we don't know how many people are dead. But in my head, it looks, I don't know, it's stuck on 50,000. It might be 60,000, it might be 40,000. What we do know is that we don't know how many of those people are combatants. And really, I don't fucking care. There's too many people who are dead. No matter how many are combatants, there are too many dead. I remember talking to this guy, Jewish guy, as the number of Palestinian deaths tipped over 2,000. I didn't know what to say, but I asked him. This guy was in favor of the war. So, well, how many more? How many more have to die for you to decide that it's no longer worth it? Like, what's your calculus here? If you're okay with this, where does it end? Where does it stop? Couldn't give me an answer. I don't like that. Hate it. And I think it's perfectly reasonable for everyone to hate that. But it is completely unreasonable to spread misinformation after misinformation after misinformation in a way that makes it feel like global Jewry, like all the Jews of the world, are somehow together and responsible for pulling the puppet strings on some interstate apparatus designed to kill Palestinians. To make it feel like Israel is deliberately starving babies to death, there's war and there's horrifying and there's lies designed to hurt people. And that's a lie that not only was designed to hurt people, but has culminated in the shooting of 2 people. So next time you go to share this information, why don't you speak to someone like me? Fuck, you don't have to speak to me. Speak to someone. Speak to ChatGPT. Honestly, just have a chat with ChatGPT. There are ways to go about pacifism, about calling for a ceasefire, about being reasonable. There are ways to be a good person without being an anti-Semite, without being so viciously uncaring about how this rhetoric affects people around the world. And honestly, until people start to understand that the word Zionist itself has nothing to do with all of these things that you hate about what's going on in Israel, I think we're all kind of fucked. I did write a piece on disambiguating Zionism quite a while ago, if anyone read it. I don't think anyone wants to read it, because I think everybody wants a boogeyman. And of course, using the word Jew is a little more on the nose than using the word Zionist, but Zionism is the realization of what it means to be a Jew. It is the political ends that culminated in the return to Israel, right? For centuries, Jews were being told to go back there. And they finally did. My grandmother, born in 1933 in Budapest, her birth certificate says, as her nationality, says Israeli. She'd never been to Israel. But her, just like her parents and a lot of their other family members, all of who were gassed, except for her parents, had been baptizing each other while being told they were from Israel for generations. And still, they were gassed. And some of them made it, and some of them made it home. And Arab rejectionism has galvanized the world into a complete misunderstanding of what it could have looked like to share the land between indigenous populations. So much so that now people like myself are sitting here in front of computer screens alone, trying to make the really basic plea that you please be careful with your articulation of Jewish crimes, because they affect a lot more than those that you're trying to affect, and they do something very different to what it is that you think you're doing. There's no other political issue, social issue, where when I see what someone posts online, they don't feel comfortable being like, oh, hey, do you want to have a chat about that? And for months I was doing that, handing out my phone number, going for coffees with people. Let's talk about that, like trying to, but it got to the point where it was like, people look at you, people who have no skin in the game nor understanding of any of these things, and try to convince you that you couldn't possibly know what's going on because you've got some type of internalized bias or misunderstanding or whatever. I spent more years of my life an avowed anti-Zionist, right? Yeah, I went to uni and I did the undergraduate thing, and it made a lot of sense. I was angry. I was frustrated. I hate colonialism, I hate racism, I hate bigotry. And all of these things seem to really easily funnel into these conceptions of the Jewish state. I never read a single fucking book about it. I read a little Chomsky, a little Finkelstein, a little Lowenstein. It wasn't until I was in my late 20s that I actually started reading some history. Please read some history. Please talk to a Jew. And not a Jew who's all of a sudden decided that they're Jewish. Talk to a Jew who does Passover with their family. Talk to a Jew who at the end of Seder says what the rest of us say, have always said, indigenous people to the Levant, next year in Jerusalem.